In our last episode, we talked to Rebecca Adams, a sociology professor at the University of North Carolina in Greensboro, about her summer course on Deadhead Subculture and why she decided to teach it. This time, we'll find out how her students used what they learned in class to study deadheads in the field and what they discovered while they were on tour.
While the students were doing their classwork, they were reading classical theory and also articles about how to do research. The classical theory was mainly drawn from the work of a man named George Simmel, and he made a distinction between social form and content. Social forms are things like cooperation, conflict, individuality, unity, and so on, things that shape or underlie our behavior. Or you can also think of them as ways of understanding interactions. Three of the most important pairs of social forms in understanding Deadhead subculture are individuality versus unity, cooperation versus conflict, and then the last one would be experientialism versus materialism. For example, this fanatic tape collecting that goes on, you know, what do you call that? Do you call that materialistic, or do you call it experiential? You know, do you collect those tapes to possess them, or do you collect those tapes to enjoy the music as a way of connecting yourself to the experience? The same thing with conflict and cooperation. There's a lot of cooperation that goes on within the subculture, but there's also a lot of conflict between members of the subculture and people on the outside. And then the individuality versus unity is also a fascinating social form. Take, for example, tie-dyes. Okay? In one sense, they're a symbol of unity, membership in the subculture, but every tie-dye is different, and every tie-dye expresses some individuality, and a deadhead wearing a tie-dye outside of the concert setting is expressing individuality by saying, I'm a deadhead. There are certain of these pairs that really get at the core of the experience. You can't talk to a deadhead without them mentioning cooperation, without them mentioning individuality and unity, without them mentioning the core experience that brings everybody together and that keeps people coming back.
What makes you keep coming back for more?
The people.
It's the music and the atmosphere that goes with it, and all the people, and just the love that you feel once you get in.
All of the students said that they saw things at concerts that they never had seen before, because they were using these social forms to guide the way they were looking at the subculture. One of the things that the students commented on that they hadn't noticed before was that deadheads really do live by rules. You know, if you interview someone about Deadhead subculture, they're very likely to say, if you ask them the question, what rules do deadheads live by? They'll say, oh, anything goes, you know. But that's just not the case. When you look closely, there are lots of rules that deadheads live by. They're just not the rules that we're used to in mainstream society.
Guess when nobody took any notes?
During the show.
Yeah, but more specifically, what part of the show? Second set. Not one observation during second set. You know, if you can get it together to think during second set.
We asked Rebecca to share her insights on what drives the Deadhead subculture.
There are several decisions that the band has made over the years that I think have contributed to the intense loyalty of Deadheads. I think their decisions have contributed to long-term loyalty rather than, you know, quick mass popularity. I mean, regardless of what's happened recently, I think that that's been the main thrust of their approach. And I'm not saying they made these decisions consciously to maintain loyalty. I think they were doing what felt right, and it just happened to work out this way. For example, playing different music each night. That's one decision. Allowing taping. Both of those things have a tendency to bring people back in touch with one another. You go to the concerts over and over again, you see the same people, it ties you to the subculture. You trade tapes, that ties you to the subculture. Also their identification with symbols. Symbols made it possible for Deadheads to identify one another outside of concerts, and that also brought them in touch with one another.
Very good other one. Yeah. Shake that.
I've always liked the Dead's music, but I have this increasing admiration for them as sort of cultural heroes. I mean, here they have preserved this whole part of American culture and sort of dragged it with them into the 80s, and I just think it's great. I mean, what an incredible accomplishment. You know, even if they weren't leaving this legacy of music, that would be enough to satisfy me that they were important people.